Alberto de los Rios, and I am your Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager. And I started with the Town of Erie in September 30th of 2021. My story dates back to being born and raised in Venezuela. I was born in 1994, and I grew up in the northern coast of the country, in which you had a mixture of valleys and rainforest, and then you just cross the rainforest and then you're at the beach. And my family upbringing was very religious. I grew up in a very Catholic family, and all the values were surrounded around that. And so for me, realizing that I was different at the age of 4 always came with an internal conflict. I knew at that time, very early on, that there was something expected from me that I did not necessarily relate to. I was not able to necessarily define what that was, but I knew that something was different. And so I lived with that for decades without being able to talk about it openly. I never felt that in the years that I was in Venezuela, which totaled 16, that I ever had the comfort to really speak up openly about these things. And this also brought a lot of conflict for me in school, because I definitely knew that I was different, and I most times unintentionally I would try to express that to others, because I wanted to be myself and I wanted to make friends around being myself. And I went to a Catholic school as well, and from, I would say, first grade until the day that I left that school, which was 10th grade, I experienced some sort of bullying, both micro and macroaggressions, whether it was just the entire classroom finding an excuse to just make fun of me, and then just having everybody shout at me or say things, or finding common things for people to just laugh at me. And what hurt me most was that, looking back, I would like to ask myself, what was it that prompted them to really say these things to me, when for group projects and stuff, then they would do a 360 and say, okay, yeah, I want you on my team. And I just wanted to fit in. I wanted to be embraced for who I was, and I just wanted to enjoy school. And one thing that I remember stuck out to me from school was, I tried to tell this to a coordinator, an adult, and I told them that several people were making fun of me. And this coordinator's response was, well, maybe you shouldn't act in this way. Maybe you shouldn't act in a way that people are making fun of you. And that still sticks to me this day. Regarding my racialized experience, I grew up in a multiracial family. I remember early on the story my grandma would share, because she married a brown man, because my grandfather was the son of an indigenous woman and an Italian man. And when she brought him to her mother to request for her blessing, she denied it because of the color of his skin. And still she went on and married this man, and they had a beautiful family. And I grew up with people of many different colors of skins and hues. And in Venezuela, we talk about race very differently than we do here in the United States. And that provided me with a very, very real way of comparing one reality to another. And just because we talk about it more openly in Venezuela does not mean that race relations are non-existent, that colorism is a thing of the past. It is still real, and it's still there. Moving forward, when I moved to the United States, I was 16 years old, and I was right halfway through high school. And my experience in Miami, going to a school that was 90% Latino, was nothing short of amazing. I felt from day one that I was so welcomed, so included, and that really prompted me to open up about my sexuality. And I identify as a queer man, cisgender, and I often bounce between the idea of being gay and queer, although currently I identify more with the fluidity of in the non-determination of being queer. And since then, being in a different country with different perspectives, especially being around so many immigrants, really enabled me to hear different stories about what their lives were like before moving to the US and why their parents moved to the US. And there was this affinity of really saying, we moved here for a better life, we moved here for a better opportunity. We gave everything away. We gave our reputation, our credibility, our capacity to conduct our work that we have worked for, our degrees, everything in order to provide our children and ourselves a better opportunity for a longer and healthier life. And so that resonates with me to this day. And I truly, truly recognize the efforts that my mother really kept on for being such a dedicated parent for me as I was developing myself in high school. And so I never took that for granted. And I personally loved high school. I really tried my best to do the best that I could and be myself. And I think that worked for me. The time that I thrived most was when I was being open about who I wanted to be and being brave about it. And everything else came along seamlessly. After that, I moved to Tallahassee, Florida for college. And from the very beginning, from the moment that I set foot in college, I entered through a special summer bridge program, which is called the Center for Academic Retention and Enhancement. And it is catered towards first generation students and really centered on having diverse backgrounds in the conversation and providing the opportunity to students who would not normally have an opportunity. And this program has shown to have over a 90% retention rate, which exceeds most other colleges and even the university itself. And so the first class that I remember having was called Diversity and Justice in the United States. And so from the very moment that I stepped on college, I was already immersed into this conversation, and the makeup of my peers was so rich that we had a microcosm in comparison to the rest of the university. And that enabled me to really hear their stories as well, to see their perspectives and what mattered to them. And that set me off to a very different path than if I had just entered university through a conventional way. Moving forward, I embarked on my passion for the environment. And so I started doing things for environmental studies, and I stumbled across an urban planning class. And through that class, I then sought to volunteer at a local community garden in a historically Black neighborhood. And this garden is called I Grow. And that was my first exposure to a community outside of the university life. And I was welcome in such a nice way. And I was so intrigued, and it was so cool to see these people really taking it within themselves to build food justice. And so from that moment on, I stayed in the Frenchtown community, first volunteering at the garden, then attending a community event that they have called Collards and Cornbread, in which people come together to talk about issues relating social justice, food sovereignty over fresh food and cornbread, very, very much Southern staples. And then through that connection, I met Mr. Jim Bellamy, who is the director of the Frenchtown Neighborhood Improvement Association. And he's been a longtime resident of the neighborhood, I would say, his whole life. And at this point, he's over 70 years old. And his passion was to bring resources to the community to make sure that people had access to the basic things in life, especially fresh fruits and vegetables. And So, in collaboration with other people, he established the French Town Farmers Market. And in its inception, I became an intern and I joined and I started just exploring about what this farmers market was all about. And as I was learning about the importance of food sovereignty and what food deserts meant and how this seems to be a recurrent theme across the entire United States, especially in communities of color, the biggest takeaway for me was building community relationships. In my 6 years of the time that I spent in Tallahassee, the most important and the most significant parts were when I was in community, especially in the Frenchtown community, to have had the opportunity to talk to these people and just build these personal connections, to connect with them through food and the products that they made, but also to know them as human beings was the most rewarding thing ever. And after that involvement, I started really becoming more passionate about asking myself, how can I honor these connections, these people, and still find ways to make a difference? And so I found urban planning, which is kind of the intersection of people, the environment, and the things that we have built. And through that knowledge, I never left the community, but I found different resources and materials to really be able to bring back to the community. And so at that point, maintaining work with the farmers market, I sought to always find an opportunity to advance forward. It's like, how do we continue this conversation in different scopes? How do we not only start talking about food justice, but housing justice, political representation? All these things just came naturally when you had the community relationships, because you heard their stories and you started seeing patterns. And with that, I really learned uh, the approach of community-based planning. And through my professors, particularly Dr. April Jackson, she's been a pillar in my learning experience. We continue to really find ways to invest in the community, and then we expanded to the neighboring community, which was Griffin Heights. And before we started doing anything, we began by building relationships. And that was the biggest thing that always stuck out to me in these processes, especially with people that have had such an extensive legacy of distrust. It was, let's build a connection first before we start doing the work. Let's know each other. Let's know our stories. And I, through my last years of schooling, and when I embarked in graduate school, I decided to move into Frenchtown so I could be close to the community. I could be still maintaining those relationships, walking distance. So it was great to just be able to walk in, just have those casual conversations with people sitting at the park or just walking around. And in my little neighborhood, my mom and I were the only non-Black people. And that was a really remarkable experience in the learning, because some of these people, I remember some of my neighborhoods, Mr. Muhammad and Miss Marilyn, they had been living in Tallahassee for their entire lives. They told me back when they went to a segregated high school, and then they were only really allowed to go into certain neighborhoods, and they had to go to the train tracks if they wanted to go to school at the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University. And I recognized the value of storytelling because of the stories that they told me and what their lived experiences were. And also, something that still sticks to me to this day was across from the unit that I was living was 3 single mothers who were living in a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment. And they had around 7 children in the house. And I remember that, they would always come over and we would play, and they would play with Maddie, my dog. And there was this kid whose name is Kevion, who every time he would see my mom, he would just ask her for a hug and a kiss, because that's what he wanted. And he was always so curious and so gentle, and he just wanted to have that space because they just lived in so much poverty. And sometimes you would just hear fights because they would just have so many issues about finances, about not even being able to have like salt and pepper to bring to the table and feed the kids. And I moved away to Colorado, and my mom stayed. And I remember shortly before she moved, child services came to the house and it took all the children away, and everyone got evicted from the house. To this day, I still think about Kevin a lot, and I don't know where he is, but it is within my life's mission to make sure that, because the systems that have failed him and his mother and the mothers that were in that house, that no one else has to go through that experience, that no one else is denied of the opportunities of the basic needs, even love and an adequate education to be able to be who you want to be without anyone telling you that you cannot be this or that, or that you're confined to be something that you don't want to be. And in Tallahassee as well, I recall going to stores and being with my mother, who's a Latina brown woman who is not as fluent in English as I am, having people treating us so differently and almost hostile to my mother when she was next to me. People not even realizing that she is my mother. And I have not personally experienced these things because of the humongous white privilege that I have, because of the way that I look, because of my European features. But I have allowed myself to hear the stories of those around me, of my community, of all the people that I've had the opportunity to hear from and to be part of and to get to know. And this is why it is within my life's mission to make sure that I'm uplifting their voices and really entering the spaces that these people are not allowed to enter. And I will work tirelessly to make sure that that happens. That I know that this is beyond my lifetime, but I want to make sure that I'm doing something that will have an impact. I don't know the community of Erie yet, not fully, and I still have yet to meet so many people. But the people that I have met so far have shown me that they have a story, that they have something to share, something to give, and that they have experienced things that are undeserving, that they have experienced microaggressions, they have experienced things that are beyond themselves, because these people are passionate to make a contribution to the world. They need to be recognized. And so I want everybody to take a step back when you look at somebody and to ask yourself, what is this person's story? Where do they come from? What is something cool about this person? How can I get to know this person? How can I use this as an opportunity to enrich myself? Regardless of what they look like, of who they are, if we begin by doing that, I believe that we can start really diving deeper into our own beliefs, into what we believe is right, and really start building a community that centers on curiosity and learning. And it takes a while to undo things that people have been used to for their entire lives and have never questioned. And yet, there's always an opportunity to say, how do I make this differently? How do I make this a good opportunity for us to connect? How do I really become a good community member and I build community? How can we all come together, regardless of who we are, to make sure that we bring in different experiences, different talent, just allowing people to be who they want to be with intention and purpose. And that is why I believe I'm here. start a conversation. So I came to Colorado right in the beginning of 2020, actually January 14th of 2020. And I came because I wanted to expand my horizons in after school. And I found this opportunity working as a long-range planner in Boulder County. And I thought, let's do it. Let's give it a shot. And my time with Boulder County was very fulfilling. It taught me a lot about some of the things in planning that I really enjoyed, especially from the long-range end, which is really looking at everything from a big picture to say, it's like, what can we do both in the short term and the long term to make sure that we're providing not only the best service to the public, but also the best quality of life and achieving harmony. And so in that process, I also saw that the county had been specifically working in racial equity efforts. And I was very, very interested in that. And so I reached out to someone in my staff, Kathy Sandoval, to learn more about CREAC, which is the county's equity working group specializing and focusing on racial equity. And so I always found an opportunity to embed that work into our planning practices. And I had the opportunity to work with a small equity working group within our planning department to say, how can we continue this conversation in a more relatable aspect? How can we show the intersectionality of this work, be it in transportation, long-range planning, code enforcement, architecture, opportunities for housing? And so that was kind of one of the first times that I was able to be doing ground level work to really set the foundation for that systemic operationalizing change. After that, I had the opportunity to work with the city of Longmont briefly and as their equity and engagement specialist. And I really loved that opportunity because I was able to work directly. My primary focus was to work with community members on issues around environmental justice. And ultimately, through environmental justice, we were also talking about equity issues in general, such as housing, access to transportation, and all the other basic things, because we're not siloed in any way. Equity is not siloed. Diversity and inclusion are not siloed, and neither are any other aspects of our life and society. And so I was also very exposed to the Latino community in Longmont, which shows so much richness and also shows the resilience that they've had over the years and all the work that they've done. And that was so inspiring for me to know leaders within Longmont who have been working for decades to set this work, and to see how long we've gone and to see how much we still have yet to do. And I still, to this day, connect with them often because I have so much gratitude, not only for them, but for people in Boulder County, to say it's like, we are a community. We are all connected, and therefore it is in our best interest to work together to really push this forward, because we're not siloed. The town of Erie is not in its own bubble. We are ultimately connected. Our people go from one place to another, or people that come in or live in different places in neighboring cities, towns, and counties. And so it is so important that we're always connecting in ways to see, it's like, what worked for you, and how can we use that as a learning opportunity for us to do it better, or do something that works for us? And how can we also use this as a way to provide this as an offering to other people who are starting or who are behind us? And so when I got into the town of Erie and when I saw this opportunity, my goal and my vision was, we can use all this effort and all this knowledge from our communities, both within and also in our neighboring areas, to make a difference from the very beginning. We're growing so rapidly, and we also have the opportunity to grow equitably, to really make sure that we are having those things from the very beginning, that it is not an afterthought, that we don't have to retrofit, that we can use that to say, this is how we're doing it from the very beginning, and this is why we want to do it, and this is where everybody belongs in this community. This is not just my job. DEI work is not just for Alberto. This work pertains to everybody because we are all related to this. In every facet of society, in every interpersonal facet, there's a DEI component. Whether it is your race, your experience, your sexuality, your workplace, the way that you went to college and got a degree, all of that is ultimately embedded in the decisions that were made before us and the decisions that we are making today. And so my first goal for the town is through conversations to start building the critical thinking skills for people to really analyze what it means to do this work and where do I fit into this work? How do my perception of things are ultimately affected by my environment and the people that I was raised around and the people that I was exposed to? And how does that also affect how I interact with people based on the way that they look, the way that they act, the way that they speak? And I want people to really start recognizing, and not to do it in a way that is full of guilt, but of curiosity. Is why do I think this way? What led me to believe this? And to really dive into the iceberg model. I wish I had a picture for it to show you. I actually have it over there. But to show, it's like, how can we start at the tip of the iceberg and then we can start going underwater to see like how everything around us ultimately affects us. That ultimately then affects how we treat others and how we interact with others. And when we begin doing that, which is going to take a long time, we can really start seeing it's like, okay, maybe just because this affects somebody differently doesn't mean that I'm going to be affected the same way, and vice versa. Because this works for me, that doesn't mean that this might work for somebody else. And so this skill is going to be applicable for things outside of DEI as well, to really have that critical thinking. It helps us dive deeper and to provide a very objective point of view without disregarding other people's lived experiences, because we are seeking to recognize and honor and celebrate that we're all different and that we come from very different places, and that's what makes our communities in the town of Erie a very awesome place to be.